Good evening, everybody, and welcome to Catalyst. Welcome to this 8-week series. This is a pre-recorded video, but those of you who've joined us tonight, I want to encourage you as you feel comfortable to use the chat, make comments, ask questions. We will not be responding directly to you, but one of our Celebrate Recovery leaders is hosting the chat tonight. So if you have questions about Celebrate Recovery or about the series, then someone can follow up with you. So this series is called Catalyst, and all of us have had catalysts in our life at different times that have brought about change in our life. Sometimes good change, sometimes not so good. Even this pandemic has been a huge catalyst for change in all of our lives, in our families, in the economy, globally. Our world has changed because of this pandemic. The very fact that we are doing this series online is evidence of that. But we want to talk about how God has used the principles of Celebrate Recovery for a catalyst for transformation. And this has happened consistently in countless lives all over the world, including ours. And tonight we have Francine and Rich and Jamie, and the four of us are going to have a conversation about how the principles of Celebrate Recovery have brought about change in our life. It's pretty awesome to think that as we apply these principles to our life, it will not only bring about change, but it'll also bring about a blessing. Because these principles are based on Jesus' teaching from the book of Matthew. It's called the Beatitudes, and that word actually means happiness or blessing. So the four of us tonight are going to begin our conversation talking about principle 1, which says, realize I'm not God. I admit that I'm powerless to control my tendency to do the wrong thing. My life is unmanageable. And Jesus said, happy are those who know they are spiritually poor. Matthew 5:3. Jesus said, happy are those who know they are spiritually poor. That basically means they know that they need God. They know they're powerless without Him. Being spiritually poor has nothing to do with struggling financially. It simply means that you know that you're desperate for God. Now, He didn't say, happy are those who are spiritually poor, because the fact is, we're all spiritually poor. But He said, happy are those who know it. So happy are those who come to this point of recognizing how powerless they are. We live in a world that boasts in being self-sufficient, independent, being in control. But yet God created us to be absolutely dependent on Him and also on others. And so as long as we think that we're in control, as long as we think we don't need God, we're going to struggle because we're going to be living outside of the way that He created us. So this first principle is helping us to get to that place of admitting that we're powerless without God. And it's not always easy, but living according to Jesus' teaching that we're going to be learning about in this series will be a blessing for us. And that's pretty cool to think about that. So tonight we're going to begin talking about how this principle has made a difference in our life. And it takes courage to admit it, that we're powerless. It's humbling, not just to admit that we're struggling, but that we need help. I came to this place myself many years ago when I was struggling severely with anxiety and depression, and I really had no hope. I got to the point where I didn't want to live. I wanted to give up on everything. But I had tried so many things in my own strength and effort to fix myself, basically, to make myself happy. And nothing was working. So I basically came to the end of my own strength. Now, I believed in God, but I didn't recognize that I was powerless without God. There's a big difference. And so through a series of events and the influence of different people, I got to that place of recognizing how much I needed God. Now, everything didn't change overnight. My life didn't all of a sudden get better, but there was something that was changing inside of me. And it's interesting because God really impressed upon me that He was going to change me from the inside out. And that is essentially what took place and what continues to take place, because I got to this place of admitting that I was powerless without Him. And I realize now that even though I was believing in God and I was even praying, I was really trying to control the outcome myself. And even in my prayers, I wasn't trusting Him. So when we get to this place in this principle of recognizing that we're powerless and how much that we need God, it's surrendering everything to Him, even the outcome, and trusting that He's God, we're not. He's the one that's all powerful and all knowing, we're not. And so the outcome will be in our best interest. It will be a blessing. So that's a little bit about how I have experienced and continue to experience this principle in my life, because it's not just a one-time deal. You know, this is an ongoing thing throughout my life. So I want to ask Jamie if you could share with us a little bit about how you have experienced this principle in your life and coming to that point of recognizing your powerlessness.
Yeah, thank you for the question and just reiterating the principle. I think one of the things I'd like to pick up on is you mentioned how powerless can bring out a humbleness, and I certainly didn't feel that when I started at Celebrate Recovery. I remember just prior to, everything was just in shambles. Life was not very good at all. There was no hope. There was a deep restlessness, and I just didn't feel like I was capable of doing anything that could help me move forward. And I particularly didn't think that there was any hope for me. I didn't think that there was anything out there that could help me. I did go to a social worker through my doctor's office, and she had indicated that there was this group that met, Celebrate Recovery, that might be able to offer me some hope. And it was kind of, for me, a way to just move beyond myself by attending that first meeting. But I didn't come in with any kind of hope. That didn't come until many months afterwards. I just had this deep, powerless feeling that I really didn't know what to do with, and just I honestly don't even know to this day how it was that I continued to just take those steps forward. And I think kind of looking back on it, in a weird kind of way, there is this power in accepting powerlessness and allowing that to move you forward in your journey, however that looks. And for me, it was desperation, it was restlessness, it was anger and frustration. There was just so many different feelings that I brought with me, and was just trying to figure out a way to feel better, to be healed. And I'm really thankful that I came to Celebrate Recovery as I did, because through the process of learning about God and how He feels about me, and just working the principles and the steps, I was able to move beyond that powerlessness and realize that with God's help, I could heal. I could find a path to a better version of myself and some healing in my life.
Thank you, Jamie. You know, I think it's important what you say, that you felt that powerlessness for a long time before there was significant change. And I really think sometimes God allows that to help us get to that place of surrender in God. And I can identify with that too, that I think there were times that I really felt powerless, but then every now and then I would feel a bit better. So I think, okay, I've got it. and then it's like, no, sometimes I think we have to experience that for a while before we really get to the point of being honest with God, of saying, God, I desperately need you. So thank you so much for sharing. Francine, can you tell us a little bit about what your experience has been?
Well, I think for me it was, and I can relate to exactly what you're saying now, because for me, it started a long time ago where things just kind of crashed down around here and in my life, and it was just a matter of needing something and I tried to control everything and everyone around me, and it just wasn't working anymore. And the more things fell apart, the more I held on tight to that control, thinking that I could do it. And it quickly came to a point where I couldn't, and I realized that. So um, the saving grace for me was coming to Celebrate Recovery and realizing I was powerless. And for me, that was a sense of freeing. That was, I didn't have to control anymore. I didn't have to worry about whatever everybody else did. I just had to worry about me. And that was freedom for me. Um, and and God has really taught me a whole lot in that process, because about 8 years ago, a really traumatic thing happened in my life. And it's because of the training that he has done in my life before. He has equipped me for this, and he has given me a stronger faith and a deeper faith. And I realized that I I can't control the things that go on in this world. I can't control what happens to anyone else. And I can just trust him. And the deeper I go in my faith, and the deeper I go trusting him and realizing I am powerless in all of this, that it's freeing, and it gives me so much more peace and more comfort of just being able to let go and let God do what he needs to do, and trusting him in that, because his plan is not always my plan. I would like things to go a lot differently, but I have to trust him, and I'm so grateful for all these things that he has taught me in this, and the way that I can just let go of that control and not worry about it anymore, and just kind of take my hands off the steering wheel and just say, take it, God, it's all yours. I'll follow you. I'll listen to you. I'll do my best, and I'll just let you take control.
Thank you. You touched on a couple things there, Francine, talking about powerless, not just that we need God, but powerless to control other people. We're powerless to change the events of the past. We have, we're powerless. So when we get to this point of admitting that we're powerless, it's not just that we need God, it's recognizing those very specific things that we are powerless over. We can't change those things. So thank you so much for sharing. Rich, what's this been, this experience in your life?
It's interesting hearing your story, Glenda and Francine and Jamie, how I can connect to different aspects of the experience of powerlessness, but I find it interesting that all of our stories are so different. And for me, I'd been a Christian for about 20 years. I'd had been raising my kids, and there was I'd had battles with sexual addiction my whole life, and there was times where it was where it really had caused incredible devastation in my life, in my marriage, and brought me into depression and a lot of challenges that way. By the time I came to Celebrate Recovery, I'd been in a place where, for the most part, I felt like, things, I can kind of manage this. It's almost like it was this unwanted guest in my house that I'd managed to figure out how to live with them, but I really didn't know how to evict them. And so from the outside, I think for the most part, my life seemed to look okay. But I just couldn't get to that place where I'm, this is something in my rearview mirror. This is something in my past, and so admitting, for me, it was very hard to admit, even at first, that is it really that bad of a problem? And just coming to that place that I can't fix this. I can't have lasting victory in this area, and it's not okay. I don't want this. And starting to accept that was, for me, the beginning of my of embracing the fact that I am powerlessness. It was just difficult for me to embrace that because I liked having the answers. I like knowing, I like to be the one, giving the advice, not the one who needed the help. And so that was a really difficult place for me to get to. But as I embraced that, it was a little surreal. It was very freeing because I got to a place where, I don't know where I'm going. I don't know. I remember I just started going to Celebrate Recovery, and I didn't, I didn't know how long I was going to be there, but I'm just here for now, but I don't know what tomorrow will look like. And so for me, it was really just accepting that, I can't change this, that I need God to change this. And once I got there, then it was, it wasn't like the path unfolded for me, but it was like, okay, I think I must be on that path now. And for me, that was kind of the beginning of that embracing of powerlessness in my life.
Wow. Thank you, Rich. Thank you so much. This principle involves something we talked about a couple of weeks ago in the blog, in the e-news, and that's taking off our mask. I actually wore this morning. I had to go to my car dealership and I had to wear it. But, these masks for this pandemic are ideally to help protect us and also other people. But when we have on a mask of denial and where we're not really being honest with ourselves or even with God or with others, then it doesn't actually protect us. It's like we're hiding all that pain and that brokenness, and it actually interferes with our relationship with God and with other people. So it actually hurts us, that kind of a mask. So this principle involves honesty, and it involves vulnerability, having more authentic relationships. And very often when we come to Celebrate Recovery, many of us have had very unhealthy relationships. We've been hurt and we're afraid to be honest. We're afraid to be vulnerable and take off our mask. We don't want to be hurt again. We don't want that exposure. And so we learn through this program as well to how to have healthy relationships and how to develop healthy boundaries and how to share appropriately, how to appropriately take off your mask with someone that you trust. And that doesn't mean sharing everything with everyone, but that means finding that person, maybe just one or two people to share those really intimate details with that God has provided in your life. So it's not just being honest with God, but being honest with other people too. And I know that for me, being involved with Celebrate Recovery has really been a catalyst for me to do that more regularly when I'm struggling and I know that I can pray and I can go to God and I can try to work it out myself, and I do try to do that. But ultimately I get to the point where it's like, I need to call somebody. I need to, whether it's a text message, whether it's having a face-to-face conversation with someone, but I need to be honest and say, I am really struggling. And very often, those people that God has put in my life, they will often call me, even before I've called them. How are you doing? You've been on my heart, And so these kind of relationships that we develop really help us to recognize that denial and stay out of denial. That has been my experience at Celebrate Recovery. So I just want to ask you about that part. This whole idea of taking off the mask and having those real honest conversations. How has Celebrate Recovery been helpful for you in that? Jamie, I'm going to start with you. How has being part of this program helped you to have some real honest relationships with some guys.
Now, it's interesting that you mentioned that wearing a mask now is to protect us, and how, looking back, that's exactly what I thought I was doing with all of the different masks that I wore. I thought I was protecting myself from people, from places, from things. And yeah, it's very interesting that you mentioned that. That brought up so many thoughts on that. As far as wearing a mask now, and how I've been able to keep myself, you know, somewhat away from that, I would like to say that I don't fall back into denial, but that would be denial itself. I wouldn't do that. But I mean, I think that one of the things that Celebrate Recovery has allowed me to do is develop authentic relationships with other people that have been built on solid foundations of a relationship with Christ. And I don't think that's something that I would have ever thought I would have been able to participate in prior to Celebrate Recovery. And I'm very appreciative of the relationships that I have built and have been able to create within Celebrate Recovery, because they have allowed me to continue to move forward on my journey. They've helped me to recognize denial when I'm facing something that maybe I don't want to look at, that I want to push to the side. They're there to encourage me, to help me to embrace whatever it is that I'm facing, which is an interesting topic in itself. Embracing pain, embracing suffering, just embracing the challenges of life and not allowing them to drag me down like they had before, and having those authentic relationships. And I think that's the perfect word for it, is these authentic relationships with people that I know care about me, that I know want what's best for me as I do them. And it's just that has allowed the journey to continue to roll forward and gain a lot of momentum. Sure, there's been a lot of ups and downs, and some speed bumps put on the road along the way. But that's all they are. They're not speed bumps. Or that's all they are, is speed bumps. They're not mountains. They're not these grand things that at one time I would have never thought I could get around, but now I'm successfully able to navigate them by taking off that mask and talking with somebody that I trust to tell them the struggles that I'm facing, and then just be able to work forward from there. It's been a really great life-changing experience for me.
Thank you. You know, it really strikes me in what you say that the relationships that you have that with people that you trust, you know that they care about you and they're not judging you. And that gives you courage to be honest, because, you know, and it just reminds me, you know, Jesus said one of the most important things is to love God with all our heart and love others as ourselves. And so when you develop those kind of loving, authentic relationships, it's about caring for each other and loving one another. And wow, thank you, Jamie, for sharing that. Francine, what has your experience been in this whole area of taking off your mask?
Well, and when you say that, when we love God, then we can love others. And for so long, I had that mask on myself because I couldn't love myself, because I didn't know who I was. I didn't think I was lovable. And it took a lot of years of taking off that mask at Celebrate Recovery bit by bit by bit, because I didn't know who I was, and I didn't know if anybody else would like who I was. I had so many masks I had a mask for you, and I had a mask for you, and I had a mask for you, and they were all different. So taking off those masks and just being who God made me to be, being the child of God that he made me to be, it was scary. It was vulnerable. It made me really vulnerable in the beginning. But now, as I realize I've taken off that mask and I realize how much God loves me, and because of that, I'm able to love others so much more, and I'm able to love myself. And that's a huge thing for me. And just with Celebrate Recovery, and like Jamie said, we can have those real, honest, open, authentic relationships. And that is so dear to me, of being able to have somebody reach out to me and just say, hey, how you doing? I haven't heard from you for a while. Or, you know, and just, how are you doing? And like you said, there's times when I'm not doing so well, and all of a sudden I'll get a text message, hey, how you doing? And that means so much to me, that somebody's actually thinking of me, and just wants to know genuinely, how am I? And I've said, even through this pandemic thing, I find that even more is that people aren't just passing you on the street saying, hey, how are you? And keep walking by. Like, people are getting genuinely interested in how everybody is doing. And I really hope that will change through this whole pandemic thing. But Celebrate Recovery has really meant a lot to me, of having that sponsor and that accountability partner that just really, truly cares about me, loves me, and really wants to know who I am and reminds me of who I am as a child of God. And that's really important to me, because, as you said, I can't love others if I don't love myself and love God first.
Thank you. Something you touched on too, Francine, is the whole idea of your identity as a child of God, that in itself gives you courage to take off your mask, because it's not so much worrying about what other people think of you. You know what God thinks of you, and you know the truth. And so that gives you the courage to be honest with God, and with someone that you trust. So that's, I think, all part of wearing a mask too, right? Rich, what about you? What has your experience been in this area of coming out of denial and taking off that mask?
Yeah, I know when I first started to come out to Celebrate Recovery, I kind of made this decision that I was gonna, like, I'm here to get help. This is who I am, type of a thing. But my posture, although it probably wasn't exactly like this, but it was, my posture was maybe a little more like this when I first came in, and so as and I was pretty judgy of other people, sort of, in my mind, and as people would share in the testimonies from up front, but also in open share groups, and people would share stuff, and there's times where I would come into the group and decide, I'm not saying anything deep today, and someone would share something, and I'd be like, oh, you know, they're they're being way more open than I am. And it would just kind of cut me. Like, I'd made a decision that I think that's the first thing we have to do, is just make a decision. I'm going to take the risk of taking the mask off. And then as I watched other people do that, that was huge for me. And then it's funny how I like I said before, I have to have all the answers, have it all figured out. I sort of evaluated where I was at in terms of, how recovered I was. And so, of course, I rated myself a lot higher. And then as some of the people who were a lot farther along in their recovery would share and be vulnerable, it always struck me how that's not an experience that I can even quite relate to. And realizing that, wow, their humility, their growth, it came through. It really shone through, and it really helped me to realize that, with my mask, really all I'm doing is I'm just slowing my own recovery down. I'm just preventing myself from moving forward. And I kind of think of it, I like analogies, so I don't know if this will help or not, but I kind of think of, like, denial is like this flask. If you can picture, like the flask that we have, sort of full of water, like you're doing a chemistry experiment. And as we pour out the denial, we become more powerless. Like, we feel more powerless, and we experience that experience of powerlessness as we pour the denial out. And it's kind of counterintuitive, because we feel like, powerless is such a bad thing. But as that denial empties out, we're like, okay, I'm in this place where I'm humble, I can accept, I can change. And I find that when I'm starting to feel more maybe powerful or whatever, I find that's really, if I'm honest, that's when my denial beaker is filling back up again. So I find that people are the best gauge for me with that. Like, as people reach out, as people, as you've all talked about already, as people have been there for me, as I've reached out to other people, as they've said, hey, something's not quite right. People have called me on it, or just said, hey, how are you doing? No, really, how are you doing? that's really what's helped me to for it to stay safe enough to keep my mask off. And I'd like to think there'll come a day when I don't need that, but something tells me that's not true. So.
Thank you. Well, you know, something that you pick up on there, Rich, is the fact that when we come out, when we admit that we're powerless and we need God, it's also admitting that we need other people.
Mm.
And I think sometimes that can be just as hard, where, you know, so often we think, well, you know, I want to be there for others, but I don't ever want to admit that I need help.
Mm-hmm.
And yet what you're describing, Rich, I mean, really, we've all talked about it tonight, is how much we need other people. We need those examples of other people in our life who are sharing openly and honestly and, you know, expressing that humility. And we think, that's what I need. I want to be more that way. I know that, yeah, I'm hindering my own recovery by keeping that mask on. So God uses, you know, as iron sharpens iron, God uses us. We need each other, not just to pray for each other, support each other, and encourage each other, but we need those examples, those real life examples of transformation right before our very eyes to kind of spur us on. So we're going to wrap up now this series. This has been great to kind of unpack this principle with you guys. And thank you so much for sharing so openly out of your life and what your experience has been. But I just want to ask if you have any final comments, any words of encouragement to give people as we wrap up. And I think for me, if I had something to say in regard to this principle and really all the principles, is that it's not a quick fix. And I know that's what I was looking for when I finally got to the point of trusting God with all my heart. I wanted that miraculous quick fix. I believed that God could heal me, and that's what I wanted. But that isn't what happened. It was a process and it was hard work, but I grew through the experience, and it's all about doing it God's way. So that would be my final comments. Anyone else? Jamie, do you have any final words?
Well, I would say one thing that I've learned tonight is that I'm powerless to control my nervous tics on video. There seem to be all kinds of facial features over here. Weird watching myself back. I would say that I am actually very thankful that there are places out there, Celebrate Recovery, for me, that allowed me to take that mask off, to recognize, and I liked Rich's analogy, I really appreciated it, that the powerlessness intensified when I was trying to come out of that denial, but to just continue to persevere through it. I mean, that was definitely God working in my life at that time, thinking back to that period. But I'm just very thankful that there's a place like Celebrate Recovery where I can begin to take that mask off and step out of denial.
Thank you. Francine?
And for me, I think it's get a circle of people around you that you trust. Like, get that circle of people that have those authentic relationships. Because for me, I have slipped back in some ways and sometimes, and I need those real authentic friendships and sisters to help me and to see it, because sometimes I won't see it, and they'll see it and they'll help bring me out of it and speak the truth in love to me. And that's what I need a lot of times, is to be spoken the truth in love. And I know when somebody tells me these things, that they're truly caring about me. So get that circle of community around you and just, just be with people.
Thank you. Rich?
Yeah, no one said it yet. It's a bit of a cliche in Celebrate Recovery. So I'm going to say, keep coming back. It's, it's funny, when I first started I hated people would say that to me, keep coming back. But it was what I needed. When I first started, it was terrifying. I remember, no matter what we've all said to you so far today, coming out of denial and experiencing powerlessness is scary and it sucks at first. But you gotta just keep showing up. I think that was the key for me until I started to experience some of what other people were talking about.
Thank you. Well, I want to thank you all for joining us tonight. And for those of you who will be joining our open share groups tonight at 7 o'clock, we're going to talk more about this topic of Principle 1. Remember, it's God who wants to transform your life. So ask Him for help and reach out for help from others. And next week, we will be back Friday night at 6 o'clock for another Catalyst conversation. And just remember, these YouTube videos will be online. So if you don't get there quite at 6 o'clock, or you're not able to see it in that evening, then you can always watch it later. So thanks for joining us, and hope to see you next week. Thank you.